Hey folks, this is Screen Watching. My name's Dan Barrett, joined by Simon Foster. Simon, me so hungry.
This is not like TV, only better.
Television! Teacher, mother! Secret lover.
What, that's it? That's your movie?
Well, I said that I had an idea for a movie.
Folks, this is Screen Watching. We're talking about all the things we watch on screens. I'm Dan, joined by Simon. Simon, you're well. Please tell me you're well.
I'm very well, my friend. It's good to be back chatting with you again. We ruffled a few feathers with last week's podcast. We haven't really discussed it that much, but it was a lot of fun to do and a lot of fun to listen back to do. Ironically, during the week, $787 million was sent the way of the Dominion people by a court ruling against Fox. Ironically, that was exactly the same amount of money that my solicitor suggested I sue you for after last week's podcast. But I decided to just let it slide. Let's all just be friendly again and get on with the thing we do best and having a bit of fun here on Screen Watching.
It's funny because there were no feathers ruffled except for you, apparently, which is weird because you forced me into that conversation. So I don't know. So maybe expect a countersuit from my people.
Exactly right.
Yep. Sometimes, Simon, no
and you're
means
well, my
no.
friend. You look well.
Oh, look, I'm taking it one day at a time at this point, Simon. Simon, look, I don't want to dilly-dally, but this week we've got a whole bunch of reviews, and a bunch of them have got food-related stuff. So as I said at the top of the podcast, me so hungry for some reviews.
It stinks.
Reviews up for this week. I'm going to talk about a Prime Video, Amazon Prime Video, Dead Ringers, a TV series remake of the David Cronenberg film. I've got a really interesting show on Apple TV Plus called Drops of Gold, and I'm going to take a gander at the new anime film currently playing in cinemas called Suzume. What have you got on the docket?
Very, very nice. I have got what is apparently the biggest film over the last week on Netflix. It's a Thai film called Hunger. I've got the new theatrical release. It's been bumped up from streaming by the good people at Warner Brothers. Evil Dead Rise. I love my Evil Dead films. And I'm going to have a look at a new film with Florence Pugh, Morgan Freeman, directed by Zach Braff. It's called A Good Person. So we'll see how that goes.
A new film by Zach Braff. Gosh, I want to vom. Folks, let's dive right in. Simon, let's go first to Hunger.
จะเป็นเชฟต้องมีแรงผลักดันมากกว่านั้น
So the hunger of the title is a bit of a double-edged kitchen knife in director Siddhasiri Mongolseri's cutting, often bittersweet piece of high society carve-up. It's set in the very ostentatious world of ultra-artistic fine dining, and it speaks of the craving in all of us to consume food prepared in a way far more elegantly than being easily digestible requires. This is food as art, and art that carries with it all the emotions and anxieties and eccentricities of the artist. Hunger is also about craving a status above the social standing into which you were born, an existence that demands thin slivers of your soul be trimmed away to climb above those just like to secure a place amongst the wealthy but grotesquely compromised humans that appear to you to be better in some way. This is the great young actress in this has got a terrific name, Chutamon Chungaraonsky-Jungen. I hope I got that right. She plays Aoi, a talented young street chef at her family's noodle cafe. She discovers what she didn't know she wanted when a scout for an elite food prep outfit slips her a card emboldened with the word hunger. It's a ticket to the world of Chef Paul's kitchen. Paul, who's played with this very fierce intensity by Napachai Chayanam, likes her street food touch and starts breaking her down so he can build her up in his image, like J.K. Simmons did to Miles Teller in Whiplash, with a similar sort of dynamic going on. Soon, Aoi is letting the family values upon which she was raised slide, and the allure of attaining a certain type of special social place is taking hold. And Paul himself has long since slipped into the amoral world of corruption, wearing the arrogance of existing above the law like a badge. Hunger itself spirals with an increasing unease towards one of two potential endings: a huge fall from grace for one or two characters, or a very moralistic realization to be careful what you wish for. The film itself feels a little bit overlong, but that only raises the question of what to omit, and that's not an easy question to answer, because it plays equally convincingly as both a large-scale takedown of the vacuous, soulless, upper-class Bangkok society types, or as a more intimate character duel between Aoi and Paul, with her very humanity at stake. And of course, it's an absolute feast for food lovers, whether you prefer the noodle cafe nosh that she prepares or the food as art high dining plates. 130 minutes, a little too long, but a beautiful looking film, and not surprised it's winning eyeballs over on Netflix.
146 minutes, thank you very much. It's too many.
Yeah, it felt long. Sorry, I was looking at one of the next films. It's a lot of minutes, but having said that, I'm reminded of the scene in the film Amadeus when the Emperor says, it's very good, but you could have cut some things out. And Amadeus says, well, what would I have cut out, sir? And I'm sort of stuck with this one. Yes, it felt long, but I didn't want to be without any of the good bits of it. So quality bit of filmmaking.
Yeah, people say the same thing about this podcast. Anyway, question. You said something about something being at stake. Is that STAKE or the better one?
It was one of the many very half-hearted puns I put into that review. So let's say it can work either way.
Literary genius Simon Foster. Hey, I'm just going to dive right into one of my food picks of the week. There's a brand new series on Apple TV Plus. And look, I'm inclined to want to say that it's a French series, but it might be a Japanese series. But ultimately, is it an American series? Look, lots of questions, but I can tell you it's about a heck of a lot of wine, and we're going to drink that up after we listen to a clip.
Camille, car si tu m'écoutes, c'est que je suis déjà mort.
The reading of the will is tomorrow morning.
Last time I spoke to him was 11 years ago.
I don't think you realize what's ahead of you.
Your father's legacy is the biggest wine collection in the world. Its full value, $148 million. He set up a test to determine who would inherit this.
See, Simon, I can do some puns as well. Folks, I'm going to talk to you about Drops of Gold. This is a French TV series, at least it's primarily French language, but most of it's set in Japan. So there's a lot of Japanese language in as well. I guess it's really primarily Japanese, but the actual series is a French production based on a Japanese manga book, but produced for Apple TV, the American streamer.
Well, we're all a lot clearer on that now. Thank you, Dan, for clearing that up.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, so look, Drops of Gold. Look, I mean, where does one even begin with this? This is. Let me find the little blurb here.
It's a very pretty name for a show. I hope it delivers on that.
No, it is a pretty name for a show, and it's got some very pretty people in it as well. Basically, the premise of it is that you've got a young woman. She's in her mid-20s. She's a professional author who's got one book to her name. She had a second book she tried to get published, but the publisher wanted nothing to do with it. Said it wasn't really quite up to scratch. So she's kind of a little bit lost in the world, doesn't know exactly like what her place is. And maybe one of the reasons why she doesn't know what her place is because she's got a mother who's raised her and a father who certainly gave a good go at raising her to a certain degree when she's a youngster, but they've certainly had a falling out since then, and she's barely seen anything of the father. Now, she seems to live a fairly humble existence with her mother, like it seems to be a very sort of middle-class-ish kind of a life they're living, but the father's got a fair bit of cash to him because in Japan, he is one of, and I don't know how much money there really is in this, but he's basically a academic who specializes in the taste of wine. So he's got one of the greatest palates on earth. And as you see through a sequence at the very beginning of the series, the young woman, part of what I guess led to the fallout that she had with her father was that she was essentially, I almost want to say brutalized, but that's probably too strong a word. But certainly there was a lot of psychological pressuring into getting her to develop her palate to meet the standards of her father, which were quite exacting. Sure. But anyway, as the series opens, the father is on his dying moments. He makes a phone call to the daughter saying, hey, look, there's a car waiting for you. It's going to take you to a plane. fly here to Japan where I am. I want to see you. Okay, he doesn't express that he's dying, but we certainly, because we've seen movies and TV shows before, we kind of understand that's what's taking place. She doesn't really quite get that, and she arrives in Japan the next morning to find that he has died. Okay, but it wasn't just flown in some sort of commercial airline, it was in a fancy pants private plane, because the father, he's really got some cash behind him. Anyway, as she ends up getting to Japan, she's kind of, we'll say, befriended by a very good friend of the father. Anyway, he's like a fairly well-to-do restaurateur in Japan, has quite a number of restaurants to his name. He takes her along to the will reading, and at the will reading, she finds out that there's a young student who has apparently an amazing palate. As we see through a monologue from him, the only person with a better palate than him is the daughter. And the two of them, as per the stipulations of the will, have been told that they need to sit down in competition with one another to drink a very specific bottle of wine and be able to say what that bottle of wine is without being told. And so whoever is able to do that is going to be the person that gets the fortune, which that fortune is the very large wine cellar owned by this guy, which has many tens of, if not hundreds of $1 million worth of value to it. And so the daughter, who doesn't drink anymore, is suddenly placed in this very sort of psychologically damaging position where she has to obey her father's needs if she wants to have this financial stability in her life.
Sounds like a fascinating premise. It sounds like a really cool bit of character interaction. But
yeah. And you know what, Simon? That's the first 15 minutes of the show.
It was almost the last 15 minutes of this podcast too. That sounds like a really strong... a strong premise for a show, and I know that the people at Apple TV do a quality sort of show with material like this.
Look, absolutely, and it's a gorgeous looking show, really strong performances. The question I have while watching this, and look, subtitling, as much as people talk about the fact that it provides like an authentic experience in a way that dubbing doesn't, subtitling is also never authentic because whoever the subtitler is often, expands out with like their own sort of turns of phrases or their own perspective on what the language is saying exactly.
Is that true?
And so, yeah, I mean, it's the same with any translation. It's never, like, no word ever means, like, language to language. Like, one word is an exchange for another. Like, there's meanings and structures and, all sorts of things you need to read into language. And so when I'm watching this and I'm seeing some very on-the-nose dialogue where you're seeing a lot of really heavy exposition, I do wonder whether or not that's actually from the original language or if that's partly interpretation through the subtitling. And I think that as viewers, we're often very willing to forgive a lot of that sort of heavy exposition in foreign language drama. And so I worry a little bit that maybe the show isn't actually quite as good as I think it is. But it seems good to me. Strong recommendation from Dan Barrett.
Okay. Drops of Gold is on Apple TV. Is the term you're looking for a sommelier? Is someone who's got the perfect tasting palate is a sommelier, I think it's called.
Or isn't a sommelier a person who actually provides that service to other people?
I recall, maybe, I think it's, I recall very fondly a film called Blind Ambition, which was about the first Zimbabwean team of sommeliers who went to a wine tasting competition, and they came last, spoiler alert, but it's still sort of like a Cool Runnings type of real life story. And they were sort of sommeliers. So yeah, you might be right. But okay, so this sounds like a really interesting.
In this, they're certainly not providing a service to other people in a restaurant, which is usually where you find a sommelier. Instead, sorry, because I spend a lot of time in fancy restaurants. It's just something I do.
Sure, you do. Well, with the disposable cash that this podcast provides, I'm sure you got a lot of time to get out there and.
That's exactly it. I mean,
mix with the high society.
You'd be surprised at how many sommeliers that I engage with on a regular basis. I reach out the window and say I'd like a quarter pounder.
Yeah. All right. Okay. So Drops of Gold on Apple TV. That's enough with the subtitled stuff and all arty-farty. Let's get down to Evil Dead Rise.
That's not true. I've got some arty-farty coming up afterwards. But Evil Dead, let's do that.
No matter how busy you ever got, you always found time for me. I can't believe I'm never going to speak to you again.
Whether he foresaw it or not, Sam Raimi constructed a remarkably pliable premise when he dreamt up the first Evil Dead film with Buddy Bruce Campbell all the way back in, I guess it would have been the late 70s. It was released in 81, so we'll say the late 70s. As long as some fatally inquisitive support player offers up a few droplets of blood, the Book of the Dead, or Necronomicon Ex Mortis, will provide its pages as a blueprint for demonic terror. Like director Fede Alvarez did back in 2013 with his totally awesome first reboot, Irish director Lee Cronin also gets it. Evil Dead Rise follows the story structure, the character interplay, and the familiar beats of the series, and then puts its own very creative spin on the blood and guts gore effects and the frights that us fans, and I'm a huge fan of the Evil Dead series, keep coming back for. My only gripe is that the whole cabin in the woods setting is gone, which I think sort of detracts a little bit of that sense of isolation that is some of the real terror in the film. All the action now takes place in a crumbling apartment building in downtown LA, with Auckland doubling in for LA, mind you. This was all shot in New Zealand. Single mum Ellie, played by Alyssa Sutherland, is trying to manage 3 kids faced with the tense uncertainty of eviction. DJ wannabe Danny, played by Morgan Davies, feisty teen Bridget, played by Gabriel Eccles, and the adorably eccentric preteen Cassie, Nell Fisher. The last thing they all need is a pop-in from Aunt Beth, Lily Sullivan, who's a kind of flaky rock group roadie who needs a place to crash. Now, that's your core 2023 Evil Dead ensemble, the characters who will either succumb to the whirling demonic force that Raimi introduced 40-odd years ago, or end up last person standing, splattered head to toe in co-star Viscera. Despite Bruce Campbell's name as executive producer kicking off the film, totally gone is the goofy sort of Ash influence and physical comedy of the first 3 films, especially that sort of almost standalone romp Army of Darkness. Cronin continues the relentlessly dark, nightmarish vibe that Federez conjured up 10 years ago, with the emotional add-on of the threat of violence against some very young tots. Although, to be fair, Nell Fisher almost steals the film as the very spirited Cassie. It's fair to say that the 5-film franchise hasn't had a dud yet, which is testament to the resilience of the premise and the control that Raimi has maintained over the series. This is an absolute blood-soaked blast. I had such a good time watching this, both just giggly good fun and some legitimately scary moments as well.
Yeah, you know what? I actually don't like the first Evil Dead that much. Like, it's fine. Like, you know, it's okay. I mean, I think Evil Dead 3...
It was made
Army of
very
Darkness, there's a
cheaply.
blast
Yeah,
there.
Yeah, it really is. That's a lot of fun. And Evil Dead 2, they offered him a lot more money to basically remake the first film with Evil Dead 2. But going back and watching the first film, yeah, it's absolute bare bones backyard filmmaking, but filled with so much energy that it's hard to ignore. There was a lot of sort of passion involved. But 2 found his footing. 3 was a whole other thing in itself. And then it was a long time between drinks. And I'm not counting, of course, the Ash TV series as well, which had a lot of fans, which I only ever saw a few episodes of, but I know it was a lot of fun.
Counterpoint. Did I have a lot of fans? I mean...
well, clearly not in the end. It sort of it came out all guns blazing. I know the internet was very loud about it. And, well, I mean, it got to 4 or 5 seasons or something, didn't it? Didn't it make it? I can't remember exactly. Like I said, I never really got into it, but
I feel it was right. 3 seasons, and it was playing on Stars, so it's not... I think it was Stars at least. It was certainly a network that didn't really have huge ratings expectations. And I don't know, it seemed like a thing where there was a lot of publicity, but I never really saw real people talking about it. Not really.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think this still exists wonderfully as a big screen movie, the Evil Dead series, and it's worth getting along if you love your big screen horror.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's move on to, speaking of big screen horror, this is a small screen thing though, Dead Ringers, the TV series remake of the David Cronenberg film from back in the day.
It's impossible to explain this relationship to anyone outside of it.
We just cut a baby out of a woman's womb. She asked us to. We didn't just, do it.
She's the funny one. My sister and I do work that is groundbreaking, but hopeful, radical, but safe.
Confession, I've never seen the original Dead Ringers. I've seen quite a few Cronenberg films.
I was so ashamed. Just off air then, we had a little bit of a chat, and I said I'd only ever seen Dead Ringers once, and that was as a VHS title, so I thought I was in the bad books. But you've never seen it, so okay. So you're coming to this with a fresh palette.
Yeah, but the thing with Dead Ringers is that, look, I mean, my perception of the movie is that it's got a bit of a cult sensation around it, but I don't think it's necessarily one of the films that Cronenberg film fans necessarily revere in the same way they do some of his other pictures. Like, I think it's certainly got fans, but I don't think it's like no one's rabid about it.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's very synonymous of a very specific period in Cronenberg's sort of filmmaking, and he's coming off The Fly and had a lot of success with that, and then got a choice to make whatever he wants, but still within the sort of the commercial film world, so to speak. And this was, it certainly didn't make any money. It barely sort of made a dent at the box office upon release, but has found favour through the years. But yeah, it's not one of his big films.
Yeah, so the original star Jeremy Irons in a dual role. He's playing identical twins. Gynecologists. See, I was just like reading from a screen as opposed to actually saying words. Twin gynecologists. Okay, and the thing is that if you're going to make a TV series out of that as a premise, you can't do a dude playing a gynecologist in 2023. Like, it's just...
Especially Jeremy Irons. That's instantly creepy.
Yeah, look, I mean, there's nothing that's, happening there. So anyway, rebooted TV series. And if you're going to do a reboot of a TV series, okay, if you're going to do a reboot of the movie into a TV series, who do you hire to replace Jeremy Irons? And the answer is obviously Rachel Weisz.
Sure.
Yeah. Now, my understanding, and I don't really know that much about the production of this, but my understanding is that Rachel Weisz is quite a fan of the original movie, and she was actually one of the people that really pushed for this remake to happen. So how much of that's true and how much of that I've made up at some point, I'm not too sure, but I believe that that's a true thing. So anyway, Rachel Weisz is there playing these two twin doctors. One of them's a very sort of outgoing, very extroverted person. The other one is the introvert. That's probably the same dynamic as the Jeremy Irons twins, I'm presuming.
Yep.
Anyway, what's a bit interesting is that the two of them as gynecologists are obviously heavily involved in women's health. And so that's a big part of what's going on within the TV show, particularly as they've got... we'll say a medical project that they're involved in. I don't want to tip the hand too much as to what the show's doing. But they've got something they're involved in, and so they need someone with some money to come along to invest some cash into it. So you've got that side of things going, but then you've also just got like the sort of creepy stuff that the two twins do, which is that they swap lives pretty frequently. So there's a phrase that gets used by the outgoing twin talking to her more sort of inward-looking sister, and it was something like, "Do you want me to get her for you?" Okay, and the implication is basically that quite regularly, anytime that the sister is reluctant to embrace like a possible romantic conquest, the outgoing sister will go and, be a wingman, but suddenly ease the gates to, we'll call it romantic conquest.
Okay.
But anyway, so
that's very similar. That's very similar to the movie. Yes, there was the sort of professional, quite upstanding Jeremy Irons, and then there was the filthy, dirty, creepy Jeremy Irons.
Yeah, and so it certainly feels a bit more progressive in this because obviously you've got like female characters as the main sort of protagonists on this one. It's no less creepy. It's definitely sexier. Sexier in like 2023 context. But I mean, the thing is that people watching it in 1988 were probably going, "Oh, Jeremy Irons, that's like fairly sexy." I'm sure there were women and some men in the audience who were responding to that quite, heavily. But that's just, yeah. But you can't do that in 2023. But you can definitely do Rachel Weisz in 2023. And the only thing that kind of throws it a little bit for me is that from some of the conversational elements through it, it certainly seems like it's supposed to be a set of twins in their maybe late 30s, early 40s, and Rachel Weisz is not that anymore. Like, it's not like she's an old crone by any means. Like, she's a gorgeous looking lady, but like, we've kind of known Rachel Weisz around for decades and decades at this point. Like, she is a woman in her early 50s and, incredibly good for her age, but at the same time, like, she suddenly is not late 30s, early 40s. And so that element of things is a bit rough, but that's the only complaint I've got about the show. The rest of it, it's very watchable. I've only seen the first one of 6 or 8 episodes. I'm going to say 8 episodes that dropped on Amazon Prime. By the time people have heard this podcast, it will have dropped a few hours prior. But, we haven't we're in the future, so whatever. But anyway, it's quite good. Simon, I definitely recommend sit down and watch some Dead Ringers, because I think you'll certainly enjoy this one. I no hesitation recommending it to others though.
Interesting pedigree to it. The woman Alice Birch, who's the creator of the TV version of the show. I'm just looking through her IMDb things here. She did a lot of work on Normal People. She was a writer specifically. She did a lot of the first seasons of Successions as a writer and story editor.
Yeah, but here's the thing: if you look at the stuff she's sort of worked on, like they're necessarily not shows that have a lot of creative input from the writers on staff. Like it's very much sort of productions with a auteur and people in support of that. And it's a bit hard with TV credits these days to say that, oh, they've got these credits specifically, so therefore this is going to be a quality production, because you've got like so many variations on writers' rooms these days, and it's all just a bit funky. So it just sounds like she's got a good pedigree, but I'll say that it's all in the execution of this, and it certainly delivers.
Dead Ringers on Prime Video as we speak. Let's go back to the movies for a limited release film starring Hollywood's big thing at the moment, Florence Pugh. It's called A Good Person.
Wake up with the sun in the morning, go to sleep with the moon at night.
For the model train enthusiast, we lord over a world where the neighbors are always kind, the lovers always end up together.
Allison, every memory I cherish has you in it. I love you.
And the train.
We meet Florence Pugh's character, Vivian, at the start of what should be a very happy film for her. She is engaged to a young man. They're having their engagement party. As the day progresses, she's driving her soon-to-be sister-in-law and her husband in a car to the city to try on wedding dresses, but a terrible accident happens that kills both of them, and Florence Pugh survives. We jump 12 months into the future. She's overcome her physical injuries, but she's still an emotional wreck. She's living on her mum's couch, the mum played by the wonderful Molly Shannon, and she has become addicted to the evils of OxyContin painkiller, prescription painkiller, and she finds that her life is taking on all the characteristics of a junkie, to put it in plain terms. She has a very tough encounter at a local bar while she's trying to score some painkillers with a character played by Nate Wolff, who she went to school with and with whom she was once kind of a bully towards, who now gives it back to her in spades when he finds out that she's searching for a hit. She decides to clean her act up, heads off to the local AA meeting, Addicts Anonymous meeting, which is where she bumps into, quite fortuitously as it turns out, Morgan Freeman, who is in fact the father of the young woman who was killed in the car alongside Florence Pugh's character. And they start a path towards forgiveness for both of these characters. It is a beautifully acted piece. To date, I know there's a bit of a backlash against Zach Braff at the moment, and I know as soon as I told you this was a Zach Braff film, you sent through some very capitalized text to me about your opinions on Zach Braff. But the film itself actually works wonderfully, not so much because of his direction, which is fairly by the numbers, but because of some beautiful words he's written, and certainly by the fact, yeah, I know, certainly by these two amazing actors, Morgan Freeman playing the best role he's played in years, and Florence Pugh just casting away any sort of movie star glamour that she may have and giving her all as this addict trying to find some kind of redemption in her life. I'm not on the anti-Zach wagon. Why has this become a thing? When I looked into this, there was a whole internet thing about how Zach's sort of fallen off the popularity tree somewhat, but this is a really fine film.
Do you know what it was? This is like the line in the sand where, he suddenly came across a bit of a, probably not necessarily a pretentious sort of a twat, but certainly a bit of a twat. He always sort of came across that way a little bit. But you remember back in the day, like circa, let's say maybe like about 2008-ish, when Kickstarter was kind of becoming a thing. And there was definitely the efforts. And this was kind of off the back of Veronica Mars, the showrunner of that, launching a Kickstarter to try to fund a Veronica Mars movie. But that panned out really, really well for Rob Thomas, who made that show. Not the Matchbox 20 guy, but different Rob Thomas.
No.
Worked out quite well for him. And then Warner Brothers came along and pumped a whole bunch of extra money into it. And so they made this thing. But that ostensibly had its origins there. So Hollywood is suddenly looking at the idea of fan money to be able to get these productions up and running. And then Zach Braff ended up coming out there and said, hey, look, if you want to see me be able to achieve my artistic vision, as opposed to I've been promised money to be able to make this in the past, but I wasn't able to, give it like my 100% sort of Zach Braffness to it. Okay, if you want to see this really come to a reality, give me some money for it. So he set up this Kickstarter, and basically everyone looked at it and thought, fuck off. Like, why would we give you, well-paid, like, Hollywood guy, like, a large amount of money so you can see your artistic vision through? Like, it just kind of seemed incredibly gross, and he just didn't read the fan moment entirely. Yeah. And that was, I think, the pivot point for Zach Braff. Yeah.
For a lot of people, and I do recall that, and I do recall at about the same time it was confirmed he was getting sort of syndication money for the Scrubs TV series, which was tens of thousands of dollars every week. He put the call out for the poor people of America to help him make his little movie. So yeah, I totally get why that can turn a lot of people against him. I think he has been very open about how this film came from a period of real grief for him. So it's quite a personal story about how he's trying to unpack the grief in his life and these screen characters.
Sorry, I was just a bit of a yawn. Sorry, listen, I don't know where that came from.
All that aside, go and see it for the two leads. And also Molly Shannon in support part. She's wonderful. But Florence Pugh and Morgan Freeman do some of the best work they've done in a long time. It's in limited release. It's called A Good Person. Definitely worth a look.
So I'll drop this extra bit in here, and then maybe just listeners, if you want to add some extra context in there thinking, well, why does Dan not really care for Zach Braff so much? Just contextualize it after this sentence. The only reason I know this film exists is because about 2 years ago when they were making it, because this film has sat on a shelf for about a year and a half.
Yeah.
The only reason I know it is because there was the Zach Braff Florence Pugh relationship that came out of the film. I believe fairly short-lived relationship. Sorry, this is the bit of information that people might want to really sort of contextualize my dislike of Zach Braff all of a sudden. But that's the only reason I know of it. Like, nobody's talking about this film. In fact, until you mentioned Put It on the Rundown, I was just unaware it was ever going to be released. I thought it was just a COVID, COVID mishap.
We're getting it same time as the US. It's coming out almost like within a week of the US release. It's had some mixed reviews. I think it's at about 55 or 60% or something on Rotten Tomato. I'm not exactly sure what it's at, but all of them. And Strats here in Sydney, and David Stratton has given it a 4-star write-up in his thing. So it does seem to have, it seems to be love the performances, don't necessarily love the film, but love the performances. And I'm okay with that. I had a bit of a cry in it. I got a bit emotional. I thought it was very good.
Gross.
All right, let's go back to the movies one more time. Dan's reviewing a cinema release. This is quite exciting. What'd you see?
Yeah, I went along to the movies because Simon Foster, the movie critic on this podcast, chose not to review it for whatever reason. I thought I'd take a look at the new animated film, Suzume.
この辺りに扉はない？
扉って言ってたよね。まさかはあ
君はなぜ
閉じなきゃいけないでしょここ
Okay, Suzume. Simon, you haven't seen this one yet, have you?
I have not, no.
No. Okay. So look, we've talked about this a little bit over the last couple of weeks on the podcast. This is the new film from Mikasa Shinkai, who's the gentleman that made Your Name and Weathering with You. I bring those two up as the only two films of his that I've seen, but I believe that there's another one or two prior to Your Name as well that I probably should go and check out. Now, much like Weathering with You and Your Name, the animation in this new one, Suzume, is absolutely gorgeous. It's definitely a mixture of cell animation as well as computer animation. And, basically it's seamless, but oh my God, watching some of the visuals on screen, Simon, magnifique. Mwah. I would say, though, that there's certainly I mean, I'm not necessarily a technical, technically
Often.
across some of the sort of business that's going on in these animated films. And looking at it, I didn't necessarily see any techniques that were more advanced than what we've seen him do in the past. But even so, those films look gorgeous. This looks gorgeous. And it was very much a piece of that. If you enjoyed those films, you're probably going to enjoy this one, which is about a young woman, the titular Suzume. She is... they don't expressly say where she lives. It's certainly in a sort of regional area around Japan. She lives with her aunt. Her mother has died earlier in her life, and there's definitely some sort of element of trauma related to that passing. We open, I think, with a flashback of sorts, or at least a dream, to one of the last moments that she spent with her mother. But the next morning, she's riding to school and suddenly passes a very handsome young man with very long flowing locks walking up the hill, who asks her, "Are there any ruins near here?" Anyway, she's quite taken with him, and then she goes off to school and then realizes, oh, wait, I know where there's ruins, and then goes up to the ruins because she figures the guy's probably there by now. Anyway, she finds in the middle of these ruins a large building structure of some sort that had been wiped away due to something that's happened in the region. Anyway, in the middle of this space is a large door. Anyway, the guide mentioned something about doors, so she's like, okay, you must be heading for this door. So she opens up the door and sees that it's like a portal into another world. Anyway, as the story unravels, basically there's a cat who is guiding her to all these areas where a disaster is about to take place, usually an earthquake. And so it's up for her to be able to close the door and stop the spirits from exiting out through this door to create an earthquake. So she, along with this guy with long, flowing, beautiful locks, who's considered to be a, what do they call him? A closer, maybe? Yeah, I think they said closer, which made me giggle because I thought about Alec Baldwin's speech in the Glengarry Glen Ross. Glengarry Glen Ridge. Yeah, so basically it's them traveling around the country to stop it, except at that very first door, she ends up knocking over this little totem type thing, which ends up turning into a cat. Anyway, the cat had been sort of frozen in place to keep this door in step. But basically by freeing her, I think it was a female cat. I didn't really check underneath, but I'm going to say it was a female cat. Basically, it kind of led to a point where the cat was then able to put a hex on the long-haired guy who turned him into a three-legged chair. So it's basically about this woman traveling around the country. No, this is the first 15 minutes. It's all fine. But it's basically her traveling around the country with a three-legged chair, this cat who's kind of leading them around the place, and she's tracking the cat through social media posts of people excited by this cat who's hanging out with them on trains and whatnot. And meanwhile, people are equally captivated by a running, jumping, sprinting, three-legged chair that's running through the countrysides of Japan as well. All of this is to say that it's a very sort of cartoonish, fun exploration of the trauma that's really been impacting Japan pretty much for the last 100 or so years. There's a line that's given in the film at some point, which is something along the lines of death is connected with life, something like that. It's the overall theme of how Japanese people really seem to live. So you think about Japan, and particularly through a pop cultural lens, post Hiroshima, obviously Godzilla becomes a big sort of cultural figure for them. But a lot of Japanese storytelling is like the Godzilla movies, where they've taken the real horrific traumas that have been inflicted on the country and are extrapolating that into sort of fantasy realm storytelling to be able to help process some of the trauma involved in that. And his films have very much sort of tapped into a lot of that. Your Name does that with a major sort of weather event that takes place in there. Weathering with You is very much about weather, and it's very much about the oncoming sort of climate crisis. This probably looks back at one of the other, real horrific sort of things that have happened to Japan in, relatively recent times. And that's probably all I'll really say on that. But if you want a good time at the cinema, this will certainly deliver, but also it does sort of kick you in the stomach with the feels quite a fair bit.
Yeah, he's got an amazing grasp of emotion and animation. That blend, I remember just blubbing like a baby during Your Name. It was a beautiful film. I should point out that this movie came out it's taken a while to get here to Australia. It was out in November last year in Japan and has already played US and other parts of the world, and it's taken upwards of $155 million at the worldwide box office. So these are really blockbuster numbers for this film that's sort of not crept into Australia. It's playing cinemas around the capital cities, but it's there's some big bucks. It's a very popular film.
Well, this is what's kind of interesting. So the release in Australia of the film is kind of the same time it's happening in the US as well. So Crunchyroll, the anime streamer, is the one sort of involved in the distribution globally, well, in Western countries at least. But it's open, that $100 million or 150 is largely from, Asian territories largely.
Sure.
What's kind of interesting is that, and I don't have the dollar figure in front of me, but I think it made like about $100 million in China alone across 17 days, which is the largest anime release from Japan in China to date. So, huge box office there. I'm sure it was equally as big in Japan originally, and now it's getting a sort of Western release. But in Australia, Simon, I was really, because I was kind of curious about the movie, so it was sort of half on my mind, and I was really adamant I wanted nothing to do with Mafia Mama. So I was looking at the box office for both of these films, which came in 4th and 5th over the weekend and then the week that's followed. So both of them have done just under $1 million in local box office, which is pretty impressive for box office at the moment. But it just seemed interesting that Mafia Mama managed to achieve almost the same box office value on double the screens that they've given to Suzume. And from what I could see as the week was going on, Suzume was dropping off even more screen, like day by day, there were just fewer screens around the place. And it feels to me like this film is maybe a bit of a missed opportunity by distributors to really be able to capitalize on, I guess, the rising sort of interest in anime, and particularly the rising interest in this as an anime director, because your name has been very successful on platforms like Netflix, and I think this one cuts through in a way that a lot of anime doesn't.
Yeah, and it's interesting. You're absolutely right. I didn't review this. As much as I knew about the film and wanted to see it, I just sort of didn't figure it into my week's viewing. But almost weekly there are, and I must admit, I have to put Bollywood into this sort of, the Bollywood films into this title as well. On a weekly basis, there's an anime film or a couple of major Indian films being released into the Australian marketplace. And we had the gentleman Mick Robbins, the head of China Line, on a couple of years ago now on the podcast, and he said that it's still a relatively small segment of the international marketplace for these sort of films, but it's a growing segment of the international marketplace. And the point you've made over and over again that there just aren't enough films to bring people to cinemas on a regular basis at the moment, whether that's to do with COVID or financial reasons or whatever. These are filling a gap, and hopefully people, when they realise, as you said, the only other thing to see is Mafia Mama, maybe they'll duck in and see Suzume and understand what a great, movie-going experience different types of international films can be. We've had, look at our review segment today. We've had 3 different international films, and I think they've all worked a treat.
Did we have 3 international films? We had 2 and a TV series from Japan/France.
Oh yes, that's right. Okay, we'll say 2 in a show. There we go.
Not everything's movies, Simon.
For covering that.
Well, I was just going to say, Suzume's a bit interesting as well, just as a release, in that the distributor seems to have spent no money at all publicizing this movie, and it's all very much off the back of just enthusiasm for the director and his previous works. Like, that is the only thing driving what's been some pretty significant box office.
You'd almost probably think that the audience for Suzume, it having been released 6 months ago in Japan, it's probably they've probably sourced it somewhere.
No, that's not really necessarily the case. They possibly have, okay, but ultimately, it's not like the delay is unusual for anime releases. That's often how this tends to roll out. So it'll get a Japanese release, and then 6 months, 8 months, a year later, you'll start seeing it pop up in other territories around. Yeah.
That is the end of our review segment. Well done, my friend. That went well, boy. And now we've got the intermission, which I'm going to have. If you hear some grumbling in the background, it'll be my tummy, because we have got 10 films based on food that I'm very excited about. So the intermission this week, from the Thai food treasures of Netflix's Hunger to the liquor of the gods in Apple TV's Drops of Gold. It's been a culinary dream on our screens, big and small, this week. Now, we're two men who are always thinking about food and drink, so we decided it would be fun to go back and have a look at the great foodie films and TV shows of years gone by. What were those films or TV shows that made our tummies grumble and wished we'd eaten before we went into the cinema or sat down to watch television? I guess that's the upside of TV. You can just get up and go to the kitchen and chow down. Movies are a bit tougher that way. But we have 5 things each, 5 films or TV shows featuring food and or beverages.
Me want food. Okay, so Simon, I went more than 5 because I didn't actually say 5 when I came up with this as a topic. But I'm going to be very quick with my listings here. So I'm going to blitz through this intermission so quickly so I can run upstairs and get myself a Snickers, which I'm told really satisfies. But look, because basically TV's my beat, and when it comes to food, there's actually a bit of a cheat that I can do, which is a whole bunch of reality programs. So I'm going to drop in a few of those, and then I'm going to get into some of the scripted stuff. The granddaddy in my heart and stomach is very much Iron Chef, but the original Japanese version and not the American version or any other foreign language versions that's launched since then. For me, watching Iron Chef is never actually about the food, which never looks particularly that sort of appetizing. Basically, it's always sort of oddball, weird Japan, which kind of drives my interest. One of my favorite things in Iron Chef is to watch the 3 judges that sit down to judge the food as it's presented. And it's always amusing watching one of them is a local soap actress. Anyway, it always makes me giggle. I love it. Something that I always liked was the, I know it's going to sound wild here, but there's an Anthony Bourdain series, Simon. Crazy. Imagine people liking an Anthony Bourdain series.
I know, wild. Exactly, yeah.
But the one that I like wasn't No Reservations, which was the primary show, and it certainly wasn't the CNN series he had, which was called something else. What was that show called? It was something. But the CNN one, like, that was fine as well. But the one I really liked was one that he made for, I want to say it was maybe like Travel Channel, and it was called The Layover. And it was less food orientated than most of his, but there was certainly food present throughout it. But the premise of it basically had Anthony Bourdain is spending 36 hours in a city, which is long enough to be able to have like 2 sleeps and experience like part of a day, a full day, and then like another part of a day. And it's very much about him squeezing as much of that city in as he can through that fairly short period. So it's a layover that he's doing. But anyway, really wonderful program, but like, you know, some of the food that he's checking out in that thing is just incredible. More reality stuff. There's a YouTube series which has started to get, and I'm going to say this, quite a bit of heat recently. It's called Hot Ones, which is an interview-based program where, and Simon's now nodding because he's heard of this program, if not watched it at some point. It's an interview-based program where the host sits down with a celebrity and gives them a series of hot wings, and the wings get hotter and hotter as the program goes on. As you know, longer the celebrity's able to like stand
Pedro's
up.
done one. Pedro Pascal did one recently. There's some very funny.
There's like 200 odd episodes of this thing. Like, everybody's done it at this point. But what's really particularly notable about this show is that, one, the hot wings thing is a good gimmick, but the guy who hosts it is not your usual sort of TV host. And also the questions are really quite good and very probing and really get some really interesting areas that even without the hot wings, I think would still create an interesting interview environment. But what the hot wings really do is it throws the celebrities off like their sort of guarded self. And so when I ask these questions, which are more personal and more probing than you usually find most interview programs, these celebrities usually more than willing to go there with it because they're not quite there. They don't have their druthers about them in the same way.
Yeah. I've watched quite a few of them. It's a lot of fun to watch. And just between you and I, the wing is the best part of the chicken too, quite frankly. I love a barbecue chicken wing. You can't go past it.
I mean, yes, but gosh, I love a breast. Love it. Simon.
Talking about chickens? Yeah.
Simon, please. A couple of scripted things very quickly. You can't talk about food TV at the moment without talking about The Bear, chef, the restaurant-based TV program from last year, season 2 dropping in a couple of weeks' time, I think, maybe about a month and a bit.
Does it get very food? Because I still haven't watched an episode. Does it get very food porny? Is there a lot of things sizzling on the hot plate?
It's more about I guess the culture of making that food and willing to its existence, but I guess the porny element is the care and precision taken within a kitchen and not necessarily close-ups of the food. It's interesting. It's a bit different when you think about a food porn, sort of a screen capture. So the bear, and then I started thinking a bit more about, another sort of restaurant-based thing. Mid-seasons of Roseanne took the series to, they opened up their own restaurant called The Lunchbox, where they sold what they called loose meat sandwiches, which is basically sort of a very saucy minced meat, just sort of like piled on top of bread rolls with, I guess pickles and a few other things. Delicious, and I've spent most of my life really looking for a good loose meat sandwich recipe ever since then. Think about it a lot. Two other TV shows and then a movie. Samurai Pizza Cats, okay, really celebrated pizza delivery in a way that I haven't seen any other animated program do. And of course, hand in hand with that, you got the Ninja Turtles, but Samurai Pizza Cats is really the purest as far as animated pizza goes. The Golden Girls, I mean, they regularly sat down with their cheesecake, and that cheesecake, anytime those ladies are sitting down telling their stories, regaling with each other with tales from Sicily or from that place Rose is from, and we're recording this very late at night, and I'm really struggling at this point. I've been up since 3, Simon.
Oh my goodness.
St. Olaf. Jeez,
St.
what's
Olaf,
going on?
yes. And the 80s really were the peak time for the cheesecake. The cheesecake has fallen out of favor. It's very hard to find a good cheesecake at any kind of social gathering now. But back in the day, you used to have that strawberry sort of jam thing on top, with the jelly thing, which was beautiful. And I love a good cheesecake.
Yeah, see, this is like your inner city, urban self coming out here. Get out to the suburbs where cheesecake shops are plentiful.
Oh, no, you're absolutely right. No, cheesecake was part of my suburban upbringing, absolutely. And you used to drive, whenever you were looking for houses, the first thing you do was find out where's the nearest Video Easy, where's the nearest cheesecake shop.
Yeah, both important. And also, I'm going to say, I really quite rate the cheesecake shop. I think they're pretty tasty. They do a good pav, they do a good cheesecake. Yeah. Also, we're open for sponsorships on the program.
That's exactly right. We've said it enough. At least we've earned a cheesecake each.
Well, I just think screen watching presented by the Cheesecake Shop, it just seems like it goes hand in hand. Here's the thing. People watch the YouTube version of screen watching, watch that YouTube version, look at Simon and I and say, these are two guys that know their way through a cheesecake. I'm just saying.
You absolutely got that right.
We're good talent for this sponsor. Also, just my final thing is a indie film that Simon and I have discussed on an episode of this podcast that never got published, so I'm going to mention it again. It's one of my all-time favorite movies. It's this film called Dinner Rush. It's from the early 2000s, and it's set in one night in an Italian restaurant. The first 10 minutes of a kind of a bit of a write-off, but once you get past that, as the evening goes on, the tension just kind of ratchets up in this restaurant, and it's very charming and very fun, and there's lots of plates of Italian pastas and other Italian meals going past the screen. It is very watchable. People can find the film. It's a small indie, so it's not really readily available everywhere, except there's this website called youtube.com, and somebody has very cheekily uploaded it there, so it's very easy to find, okay, but that's probably the only place that you'll find it. So give it a look. It's a very lovely movie, and it's got a whole bunch of faces and names that people absolutely know who's in it.
Danny Aiello. I bet it's got Danny Aiello in it, hasn't it?
It does have Danny Aiello in a role. John Corbett's in there, half the cast of Oz. Sandra Bernhard appears in there. Just a whole bunch of just interesting, fun faces.
All big eaters. All right. I have 5 films that I'm going to zing through very quickly, like me when a cheesecake's put in front of me. When I really started falling in love with movies and watching everything, a film called Babette's Feast came out. It's a Danish film, but went on to win the Academy Award for Best Foreign Language Film. It's a little bit highbrow and arty, but it is also a stunning representation of the very high end of food preparation and food porn. The vast tables of pheasant and deer and all sorts of pastries laid out as part of Babette's Feast in this beautiful film. And it's a gorgeous film as well, just in terms of the characters involved. It thoroughly deserved the Oscar for Best Foreign Language Film, I think in, I'm guessing here, mid-80s, maybe early 80s. Next up, I couldn't go past It's not my favorite Pixar film. It's certainly top 5. It's Ratatouille. This is the story of the rat who's also a wonderful cook, and he helps an aspiring young chef become the toast of the Parisian restaurant culture. It is a stunning looking film. This and The Incredibles are my 2 favorite Pixar films, and they're both Brad Bird productions. So to have a look at that, to see the way food is represented in an animated form is beautiful. A documentary called Jiro Dreams of Sushi. It's about a small sushi shop, just 10 seats, and Jiro is this elderly chef who demands that his sushi is the best he can find in Japan, and he has to sort of start passing on his legacy of sushi preparation to a younger sushi chef. It is just mouth-watering to watch. Very much along the lines of Dinner Rush is a film called Big Night. It tells the story of 2 brothers, Tony Shalhoub and Stanley Tucci, who want to bring this authentic Italian dining experience to New York City, and they decide to wage everything on an all-or-nothing gourmet night. And the food in this, as alongside the beautiful Minnie Driver as well, but the food in this is just delicious to look at. And finally,
sorry, wait,
you know,
Simon,
I love the pastries.
Simon, is that Marvelous Mrs. Maisel star Tony Shalhoub?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. I was worried that we weren't going to get an our Mrs. Maisel mention on our podcast this week, but well spotted, my friend. Finally, a film that has some of the best close-ups of the classic American pie you'll ever see. It's Waitress, starring Kerry Russell. She plays the role of a young waitress who has an unwanted pregnancy, decides to go through with it, and then falls in love with a gynecologist. Sorry, that's gynecologist.
Stop reading the notes.
Fillion. And it is a wonderfully warm and funny story. And whenever she gets in a mood, she bakes a pie to express that mood. So it's just close up after close up of stunning classic American baked goods through this. And boy, I'm getting hungry just talking about it. So that's the intermission, our favorite foodie things.
Okay, Simon, just a bit of news that's come through literally as we're recording this podcast. Yeah. My Twitter checkmark, which I've had for many years, has officially disappeared within this last hour.
Do you know why? What's the reason for something like that happening? Have you done something towards Elon, or?
Well, if you were a regular Twitter person, you would know that Elon is demanding that if people want to be verified, they don't actually have to do anything to be verified except for pay him between $7 US to about $20 Australian. And I'm not paying that money. Like, that's ridiculous. And also, anyone with a blue check mark now just looks like a chump that's willing to give Elon $20.
Yes, all that is true. But where does it put you in the world of Twitter now? Is it going to be harder to get followers, or you're going to hit less when you tweet something? How does it work? Twitter
culture now, you're more highly regarded by followers if you don't have a check mark than if you do, because it means that you're not paying Elon $20. Okay, but as far as the platform is concerned, you don't quite have the amplification that will be given to people that have a blue check mark. But also, like, you know, this is a social media account, it's a platform that's falling to the toilet rapidly. So, you know,
all right,
it is what it is.
Okay with it, because I know that you're quite vocal on the Twitter. So
look, people can find me over at Substack and Substack Notes now. It's all good. It's all good, Simon. But anyway, let's move on. What else have you been watching? I'm going to list 3 things I've watched recently, and I'm going to talk about each of them in 35 seconds. Picard. I've been meaning to watch this for years, haven't gotten around to it. Everyone's going crazy right now for season 3 of Picard, which has brought back all of the Next Generation cast to do Next Generation stuff. Good. I'm still back in season 1, where I've just started watching it with regularity. I'm loving season 1. It wasn't that well received by the fans. Okay, and I suspect it's because it's not just overly loaded with fan service, but, you know, it is what it is, but I'm having a great time with it. Lucky Hank, I reviewed this on a show about 5 weeks ago when it premiered. It's this really great, very lo-fi dramedy starring Bob Odenkirk from Better Call Saul as a university professor, the chair of the English department. And not to be confused with the Netflix series The Chair, which was awful, but this is actually really quite good. Episode 5 of the show, the last 10 minutes. Oh my God, I've not seen TV that's this unexpectedly moving.
I know you went off about this on your socials. Yeah. You put a big thing up about episode 5.
Yeah, like it's an incredible like final end to this episode. It's an episode which all of the people from the English department, as well as, other friends and well-wishers, have been invited to Hank's house for like a lunch type thing going on. Basically, there's some tension between Hank and his wife. Things are unraveling there, and it's all happening in front of all the colleagues who stress Hank out anyway. But also, Hank has taken receipt of some of his father's possessions recently, including a large cuckoo clock. Actually, I don't know if it's a cuckoo clock. It's like a large clock. Anyway, as we start seeing the episode, the clock starts to knock loose like a couple of memories for Hank. And by the end of the episode, my God. But anyway, just incredible, like maybe one of the best hours of TV I'll see this year. Just magnificent. And then also the season finale of The Mandalorian this week. It's been a season where a lot of people haven't really been all that into it. I think that there's been some knockout episodes and a few that have been like really just quite poor. I wouldn't call it a disappointment of the season, but it's certainly a season that doesn't necessarily hit with the highest of them. But what I think is fascinating about this as a season is that The Mandalorian, like all Star Wars and Marvel stuff, like it's all part of like shared universes now, and all these shows are supposed to be interconnected and whatnot. The Mandalorian was very much gearing towards spinning off its own series called Rangers of the New Republic. Gina Carrero, who is the former TV star from the program, got very much fired from it after some of her very, we'll call them right-wing, fairly extreme viewpoints were raised on social media platforms. So as a result, they cancelled plans to do this Rangers of the New Republic series. And a lot of the story elements from that TV show have been now brought into The Mandalorian. And it's just kind of fascinating seeing this season finale of The Mandalorian effectively blow up the entire premise of the show to now be pursuing a premise which is pretty much exactly the same premise as Rangers of the New Republic. It's interesting, fascinating TV.
Nothing goes to waste in the Star Wars empire, in the universe, for sure. I caught up with two very new shows this week. First off, I had a look at the new Amazon Prime comedy experiment called Jury Duty. Now, in this show, it's a mock reality series in which everybody involved in a criminal trial in a Los Angeles court is an actor, except one person. And what unfolds is a whole lot of very carefully and skillfully crafted plot elements that seem absolutely bizarre to him and absolutely hilarious to us. I didn't know much about this show when it came this way, other than it had Ruben Fleischer as one of the EPs on it, and he did the Zombieland movies. And it features James Marsden playing a kind of a douchebag version of James Marsden. He's very funny. The show itself is often side-splittingly hilarious. It's a tight sort of 26, 28 minutes per episode. It all builds towards a large set piece in most of the episodes. And the young man who seems to be caught off guard by everything that's going on, who kind of can't believe the madness that is the American court system, is just terrific. A guy called Ronald Gladden, who may or may not be also revealed to be an actor. I don't know if we're the ones being duped here, but the way it's played and his reactions have this incredibly funny sort of mock reality TV about it. So Jury Duty was the surprise for me this week. Another surprise is a show called Totally Completely Fine, which is a Stan series, and it stars young actress Thomasin McKenzie, who I adore. I think she's a wonderful young actress. She was the young girl in Jojo Rabbit. She went on to star in the Edgar Wright film Last Night in Soho, I think it was called, and some other really fine big screen work. This is her first TV series that I'm aware of. She inherits a house, which is on the edge of a cliff, which is where people go to commit suicide. But they have to go through her yard to get there. So it becomes her role to sort of talk people down and welcome her into the house and work through their problems, which is sort of a dark premise. And some of the comedy is played a bit bleak, but also some of the comedy is played a bit light and a bit tonally hard to sort of understand and get a handle on. What I thought when I was watching this is written by clearly a writing team or a bunch of writers who grew up adoring Friends, because this has that sort of beat to the dialogue and cutesy sort of antics that a lot of modern comedies, and I know you're quite a fan of Colin from Accounts, but I had a bit of a trouble with Colin from Accounts for the same reason. It's like people feel they have to talk a certain way to be in a sitcom or to be in a modern comedy. And when you've got the very dark subject of suicide pitched on this very sort of goofy, light tone, and this actress, Thomasin McKenzie, in the middle trying to make it all work, I found it a really sort of hard slog to get through, especially the second episode, which was, I found a really just mishmash of ideas and tones. So maybe it'll find its footing and be more appealing in weeks to come, but Totally Completely Fine is not high on my radar anymore.
Yeah, look, I'm pretty keen to give it a look, but yeah, I'm not super excited about it.
All right, let's wrap this thing up with a couple of fun segments. This day in history. You ready, Dan? Here's some questions for you.
Okay,
that was me clapping. April 21, 1984. After a record 37 weeks, Michael Jackson's Thriller is knocked off the top of the album chart by which film soundtrack? 1984, early in the year.
So my first thought was Flashdance, but I'm pretty sure that's 1983 because I saw some 40 years of Adrian Lynn's Flashdance in my in my feeds in the last couple of weeks. So it's not going to be that. So 1984, I'm pretty sure it's going to be Footloose.
Ding, 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 ding.
Yes.
Well done. It is Footloose. Good man. April 24, 1983. For the first time in Australia, Channel 028 presents a delayed telecast of which international event?
And Channel 028, I presume that we're talking about one SBS, Special Broadcasting Service.
Yes, we are.
So probably Eurovision, I'd guess.
Ding, 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 ding. Well done. It is. Okay, April 24, 2001, the Australian version of which hit international franchise premieres on the 10 network?
Okay, so I've been reading these like the last couple of minutes, thinking it through. And I was thinking 2001, so I was trying to remember what reality shows had launched at that point. Was that, sorry?
Yeah. Open the running sheet, did we?
Yeah, I actually did, and started looking at this while you were talking about jury duty. Yeah, so I was thinking 2001, so I don't think it's the weakest link, because I'm pretty sure, I mean, first of all, that was on Channel 7 and not Channel 10, so we can rule that one out. Okay, and I realize I'm playing this now like I'm doing one of these, reality quiz things. Much like they do on the week on Millionaire, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, okay, but I don't think it's Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, because I think that was 99, so I don't think it's that one. It's definitely like some sort of a game show or something.
No, it definitely is not.
Not a game show. It's not Master Chef. It's Big Brother.
Yes. Who'll ever forget the antics of Sarah Marie Fidel, Gemma Gorned, Blair McDonough, and Pete Timms, who were some of the early, the first contestants of Big Brother. Well done.
I think incredibly very restrained of you not talking about the bum dance.
Oh, yeah, I remember the bum dance. Who could ever forget the bum dance? God, we all watched the first series of Big Brother.
We really did.
April 26th.
Sorry, Simon. I believe that we all watched Big Brother and also Big Brother Uncut.
Yes, we did. Stayed up late for it. April 26, 1992. This is a double-barreled question. 2 long-running family favourite sitcoms air their final episodes on the US ABC network. Can you name them? They both wrapped up on the same day, April 26, 1992.
I actually can name this because I'm the sort of guy that gets into Wikipedia articles that are called, like, for example, NBC 1991 to 1992 TV season, and look at grids quite regularly. And from looking at some of these grids, I actually know exactly what these two are. This was Who's the Boss and Growing Pains, which I believe used to air back-to-back on the ABC network on the same night.
Dan Barrett, you magnificent bastard. You've done it. You have got 4 out of 4 on this week's history quiz. That's quite amazing. Can you do it? Can you do it again on the birthday quiz? Here we go. Drop in the birthday sting.
No, not happy birthday. No, not that. Please, no, not happy birthday.
April 22, 1967, Cheryl Lee. She's only a couple of months older than me. Cheryl Lee. April 23, 1955, Australia's own Judy Davis. April 24, 1934, Shirley MacLaine. And April 24, 1942, the wonderful Babs, Barbara Streisand herself. Now, these 4 actresses have all played a certain type of character. What would it be that bonds them?
I was going to ask whether they've all dated at some point John Peters, but maybe that's not what bonded them.
That would be weird. Probably have, knowing John Peters, a randy old bugger.
It's pronounced Barbara Streisand. Oh. Streisand. Nah, I don't think I can do it. So, I mean, have they all played corpses?
Ooh, no. That's not the answer. You ready? You want the answer?
I do want the answer.
Cheryl Lee in Twin Peaks, she played Laura, who was, for a brief moment, a prostitute at One-Eyed Jack's, a casino brothel just north of the Canadian border. Judy Davis played a prostitute of a murdered woman, a friend of a murdered woman, in Winter of Our Dreams, the Australian film. Shirley MacLaine very famously played a French prostitute opposite Jack Lemmon in Irma la Douce in 1963, and Barbara Streisand was a prostitute opposite George Segal, who got her evicted.
I'm glad you finished that sentence.
Owl and the Pussycat. In The Owl and the Pussycat, 1970s. The quiz section of this podcast is over.
Okay. In fact, once the quiz portion of the podcast is over, the podcast is over. Folks, this has been Screen Watching. Thank you very much for listening to it and watching on our various video-based channels. My name's Dan Barrett. You can find me on Twitter at the Dan Barrett. You can start your day with my free newsletter. It's called Always Be Watching. Find that one at alwaysbewatching.com. Found at Substack. It's got the big stories in TV, streaming, and film. And on Fridays, there's the Always Be Streaming newsletter, which recounts the big shows that launched that very week.
And am I right in saying that you freshened up your logo? You've given it a bit of a spit and polish and got a new design happening on there as well?
Yeah, so I've definitely done that on the newsletter, but there are elements of the newsletter and website which have a new logo, but not the newest logo. I did a bit of playing around and haven't updated them all
interesting.
Time yet.
And am I right in saying that you've also wandered back into the Facebook atmosphere as well?
I mean, not really. It's basically I just had a couple of things that I needed to get some people out in the world, and I made a few Facebook posts, but I don't think I'm there with any sort of regularity. But
come back to Facebook.
Well, anytime I post on Facebook, it's funny that you made that sort of ghost sound, because all I get is cobwebs and just the sound of rattling chains of ghosts of years gone by.
It's a thriving network of old people writing things that only they read. Okay, Twitter at Simon R. Foster 1. Read my words over at Read my words over at screen-space.net. I've been putting a lot of stuff up there lately. The Screen Watching Facebook page at Screen Watching Podcast. Twitter is at @screen_watching. There's a wonderful Screen Watching YouTube channel. Lots of fresh trailers up there this week. Some really good ones. Do send us any emails, any questions you may have, or if you want to answer the birthday quiz, you can see that on the Facebook page, and then send us an email at screenwatchingpodcast, all one word, @gmail.com.
Yeah. Okay, well, this has been a productive podcast.
It has. It's been a good podcast. I don't care what anyone says. I think you're good at podcasting.
Where have you been talking to my mum again?
No, I haven't.
Okay, well,
anyway,
I'm sure
it's been a
sends
fun
her
one.
regards.
Lots to talk about.
Yeah, folks, we'll be back next week with
new?
more screen.
What's new next week? What's on? Have we got anything exciting next week?
Gosh, sorry, I don't have my schedule in front of me. Hang on. What do we got next week?
What have we got next week? There's got to be something worthwhile.
Next week, there's actually a fairly big title. I'm pretty sure next week is Citadel, which is the very expensive new Amazon Prime Video series.
Oh,
yeah.
Dipikra Chandra Jonas or something. Okay, yes.
That's right. We're going to be talking about that next week. We're also going to talk about...
is Fatal Attraction nearby? I'm very keen to see what you say about Fatal Attraction.
I was about to mention that straight after I mentioned Mrs. Davis, which I believe will be dropping on the internet tomorrow. So I'm very keen to give that a look.
Yeah, that's a big
And
deal.
if we weren't recording this a little bit
a lot of
earlier
big
than
shows
usual, it would have been into this week. There's the season 2 return of Sweet Tooth, which I'm sure I'll mention. Probably won't necessarily review, but also time pending, I might do an advanced preview for Fatal Attraction.
Wow, I'm very excited by that. The wonderful Lizzie Kaplan. I'll be looking at the new Ana de Armas, Chris Evans action film Ghosted on Apple TV, and 80 for Brady. The four ladies, Jane Fonda, Rita Moreno, Lily Tomlin. Don't smirk. There's not much out of the movies right now. I'm picking at scraps here. 80 for Brady is in movies. So that'll be in our review segment next week. Good night, Dan Barrett.
What week does the new David Cronenberg's son, who I want to say his name, Brandon, when does that new film come out?
Infinity Pool. Early May. I got it down for, I think, the May 5th show or something. I'm seeing it up at Coffs Harbour. I'm off to Coffs. Next week, you'll be talking to me from the lovely surrounds of Coffs Harbour. I'm up there for the Swift Film Festival, and they're seeing it. Although I understand by your letterbox page, you've seen Infinity Pool and weren't that impressed by it.
Spoilers.
Okay. All right. We'll talk about it later on. Can I go to bed now? Go and eat your Snickers.
Yeah, I desperately need that Snickers. Folks, this has been Screen Watching. We'll be back next week.